Hello, welcome to a time of devotion. I find myself looking for a bit of shade today. It's beautiful outside. That sun can get hot though. I want to speak to you a little bit about the book of Ezra. Basically, the backdrop is that the Israelites have been exiled to Babylon, and 50 years later, they have been allowed to come back home. And they come back home to the destruction of the temple, and everything is in ruins and rubble. But from Ezra 2:68, as soon as they came to the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, some of the heads of the families made free will offerings for the house of God to erect it on its site. Coins for a building fund. This reminds me a lot of what is going on with our church after the pandemic, coming back, and where do we go from here? But after nearly 50 years of exile in Babylon, the Jewish people returned to their homeland. The second chapter of Ezra reads like a census, and there's this accounting. No detail is spared. All of those years later, we read the names of those who made the journey back home: servants and singers, horses, camels, mules, donkeys, and there are specific numbers given to the number of animals. We see 7 and 337. But Ezra gives us this narrative. It's meant to tell us how important it was for God's promise to be fulfilled. And so he accounts, after this 50 years, returning to Palestine. 50 years in a foreign land, a foreign country, meant that children had been born and they had given birth to children. There had been people who left who would never live long enough to return. So life continued to go on. So in 50 years, a lot can change. Restoration and rebuilding of the temple was their aim, and it required work, and it required attention to detail. It required an investment by the community. The first place the assembly goes when they return is the site of the house of the Lord. What remains? There is rubble there and remnants of objects that they once used in worship. Imagine the mix of emotions that took place upon seeing the center of their worship, in seeing it had been destroyed. But also the excitement that they would restore it, they would rebuild. In my head, I hear the voices of those venturing back to the neighborhoods destroyed by fire or flood, looking at what has been lost, and always we hear them saying, "We will rebuild." The heads of families made a statement with their resources. And what they did was that they put some money where their hope was. And they gave, the scripture tells us, they gave a free will offering to help with this endeavor of rebuilding. So determined were they to restore the place of worship and the center of their lives, that was the temple. The first thing that the families did was put some gold and silver coins into the treasury. Like those gifts the initial gifts for any type of capital campaign, like those first gifts, these exiles were modeling. They were modeling confidence that they had that God's promises would remain true, and that they would once again return to the temple. And so they gave their coins freely, and they gave them with a huge vision. And they cast that vision and what it would look like. Ezra's detail of handing over, somebody hands over 100 priestly robes. Someone had the foresight back when they left. They had the foresight to take those robes with them, with the hope that one day they would return from being exiled in Babylon, and they would return to their homeland, and they would need those priestly robes. And so they were like refugees and migrants of every generation. They took with them what they treasured the most and what they thought they would need again when all was restored. Someone said, "Get the priest robes. We will need them when we come home." And that's out of the scripture. Rebuilding anything takes coins. It takes time and dedication. Restoring requires robes, requires families to be a part of the assembly, and God's promises remain intact. And those who trust in those promises stand, and they have a vision that things will be restored, and that all things through God are possible. So I guess as we continue in the church, amidst all of the changes that we have seen, amidst all of the technology, and as we continue to be the church, I hope that we will hold on to the things that we treasure the most. And they may not be buildings or property or anything like that, but the gathering of people together, the treasury of, or the treasure of gathering as the community together to worship and to be with one another. I miss that about the church, and I hope to see you back. I hope that your Lenten journey has been going well, and that God is providing what it is that you need. Will you pray with me this day? Lord of coins and robes, Lord of families and animals and kings and servants, your promises will not be thwarted. Even when we wonder why you delay our fulfilling. 50 years, 100 years, a lifetime, generations, we await with eager longing for the day when the lion will lie down with the lamb, when crying and mourning will be no more, when your promised restoration will be fully known. Until then, grant us the confidence in your promises that they will be kept, and allow us to keep the priestly robes, figuratively, ready to begin again, and ready to make our offerings of faithfulness. May it be so. Amen.